Hello, I'm Barlow Jacobs, and I'm excited to be in downtown Chattanooga at the Tivoli Theater to present The Quarry as part of the Bobby Stone film series. The Quarry is a neo-western, slow-burn mystery thriller set in the wilds of Texas. The Quarry is now available on digital, on-demand, Blu-ray, and DVD. You can also go to TivoliChattanooga.com to find out more about this film and other films in the Bobby Stone film series. Today we're going to be talking to Scott Teems and Andrew Brotzman, who wrote the script for The Quarry, and the director, Scott Teems, who directed the film. We're going to be talking to them about the process of making the film, learn more about it, and we're excited to have the opportunity today. So I hope you guys enjoy it. Awesome. Well, I'm excited to be here in Chattanooga, Tennessee at the Tivoli Theater in downtown with Scott Teems and Andrew Brotzman, who co-wrote The Quarry, and Scott directed it. And yeah, I'm excited to get a chance to talk with you guys. We've been trying to set this up for a while. So welcome.
Yeah, no, super excited and really appreciate you guys making this happen.
Yeah. I just wanted to start off. I mean, this is I just want to kind of hear a little bit of the genesis of the movie, like kind of where it started and how you went there, because I know it was definitely a journey to get to the screen.
Yeah, a 10-year journey. About 10 years ago, after I had finished my first film, That Evening Sun, which you know a little bit about because you're in it, I was looking for the next thing. You know, I was still a pretty young writer and didn't have, now I have a couple of things always I'm trying to make and things that are ready. But back then I was a little, I didn't have as many ideas flowing or stories I was sort of gathering up that I wanted to tell, and I needed the next thing. And I started scavenging, trying to find, I've never been a big idea guy, for better or for worse. And I've always really found great inspiration in source material, and saw the blurb for this book, The Quarry, somewhere online, and the synopsis just grabbed me. It was instantly sort of both the hook, which is stranger rolls into town pretending to be somebody he's not, that kind of classic setup. We've seen that before in movies. The hook grabbed me, and then sort of the ideas the book was about grabbed me, things that I am interested in: men, violence, religion, where those things, intersect, and crash into each other, collide. And so I bought the book, read it, and was really taken by. The book is set in South Africa, so it's post-apartheid, published in '95. This author named Damon Galgut, wonderful author. But the book was about racial conflict in that country. But I just couldn't help but see the parallels to our country, both in sort of racial conflict and also just the book was set in the sort of dusty prairie, plains of coastal South Africa, dry, barren. I just saw Texas in my mind. And of course we have the border there. So we have our own racial issues. And in the 10 years since, they've only become more pressing and relevant. So the book grabbed me. I read it, wanted to make it and translate it to the States. Called Laura Smith, who I've now made 3 films with. We had made 1 film at that point. She produced That Evening Sun. We together began to pursue the rights for the book, eventually optioned the rights ourselves and developed the script. I started writing the script. This is 2010, I guess. And started writing it and got to a point, any script writing, for me anyways, it's always a marathon. There's always years and years of writing. And at some point I sort of hit a wall, and I just felt like I was not cracking through to the depth that I wanted to reach with this. And sometimes you got to you got to tag off, you got to bring in somebody to relieve you. And so I called Andrew. Andrew was a friend of mine. We met through our mutual friend and your mutual friend, David Lowery. David had edited Andrew's first film he directed, called Nor'easter. And David just called me one day and said, "Hey, I think you should meet this guy, Andrew. I think you guys would get along." And so we started hanging out, and Andrew had given me some really astute notes on my early drafts of the Quarry. And so when it came time for me to go, I just need somebody to help me take this to the next level. He was a natural person to call, and that was our first time working together. We've since written a couple of things together. We're writing something now, and so it's become a very fruitful relationship. So once we had that script, we almost got it made back then. 2012, 2013, we had a cast, and we got close a couple of times, and just never quite got over the finish line. You know, there weren't as many options. Wasn't streaming. The platforms were limited. It was still coming out of the housing crisis. There wasn't a lot of money for a film like this, a challenging film about big ideas, you know, and we had a cast of fantastic actors, but no big stars. So it just was hard, you know. Never quite got it made over the finish line. So it went away, and that happens sometimes. You know, projects sort of die off, and you love them, and you hope they have a life at some point. And if it's good, I tend to have the hope that it'll come back around someday, and someone will spark to it again. And sure enough, a few years later, so this is 2018, Kristen Mann, who in the interim had partnered up with Laura Smith to produce together. Kristen got a call and looking for a project for Shea Whigham, who was their mutual friend, and she called Laura. Laura gave her the script. All of this without me knowing any of it. Me or Andrew went sort of in the dark, and I get a call one day. Hey, I think Shea Whigham might be interested. Is that interesting to you? And I've always loved Shea, and he's one of my favorite actors, and we have a lot of mutual friends, but we had never met. And so I went and met with Shea and talked to him, and we just hit it off right away. And once he came on, we were kind of, that started us on our path. That was summer of 18, so 2 years ago, and it kind of came back to life. And it was nice because it came back to life of its own accord. I didn't like squeeze it. I didn't like have to force it. It just happened on its own, and that made it that much more rewarding.
Yeah, totally. Andrew, I'll throw it over to you. Like, what was that? Because I know I've had that opportunity before, and it's always interesting when somebody like something that Scott had been working on for a while, and then you kind of coming in. Like, what was that experience like? First of all, kind of like what drew you to kind of responding to the script and wanting to be a part of it, and like what was that genesis of that?
Sure.
What was that like? You guys working together as well?
I mean, well, it's been wonderful. I mean, the process was very natural. Like Scott said, we met through a mutual friend named David Lowery, who basically just set us up on a blind date, and we just talked about movies and what we were interested in and all of that. And it was very clear that we had a lot of things in common, both in our personal lives and also just in our, you know, worldviews and the things that we prioritize and the ways that we wanted to spend our time and things like that. I was married at the time when I met Scott, but I didn't have any kids yet, and I've since had 2 kids, and a lot of the priorities, I think, in our sort of home lives, I think, overlap, and it made it easy for us to talk about the intersection between both movies and our, you know, our real lives and our sort of like attractions to various philosophies and the ways that they showed up in cinema. We also just had a really common frame of reference in terms of the kinds of movies that we liked and the kinds of movies that we wanted to see and the kinds of things that we wanted to, the sort of intersection between the things that we enjoyed and the things that we actually wanted to make. But then on the other side of it, we're different in a lot of ways. You know, Scott comes to his writing emotionally and intuitively, and I come to things more analytically, perhaps, and more, you know, I like to put structure and theme up front, and I like to be able to articulate those things in really concrete ways. And so I think when Scott gave me the early drafts of The Quarry and also a different script that he and another writer had been working on, I gave him those notes. I think that he responded to them because I think in ways that are complementary to his process. And so like when we're able to talk through the action of the script, the structure of the script and things like that, I'm using a vocabulary that he's usually not, but that usually complements it in a ways that gives him, gives us both something to do. In the early stages, I was just giving him notes, and I was just saying, you know, these are the things that I think you have to commit to. These are the things that I would change if I were you. And they were, you know, I'm I'm prone to giving pretty elaborate and pretty precise notes. And so after I did that the first time, I think he did a rewrite, and then he came to me a second time and I gave him more notes. And then he said, why don't we just work on this together? And for me, it was a great pleasure, just because I did love the book. I love the concept, but like what Scott said, the things that he responded to are the same as the things that I respond to. And the more that we've worked together, the more that's been confirmed for me, which is just that we really see eye to eye, morally, philosophically. A lot of the things that he does stylistically, I agree with as well. And it's just that in writing the script, I feel like we're sort of like two sides of the same coin, because I come at it from this structural way, and he comes at it from an emotional way, and we both, tend to agree on what's working and what's not. So for me, that was a real pleasure.
It's fun because I love that, and it's a great point that we have this we're two sides of the same coin, and often, I'll have to I'll say get out of your head and get into your heart, and he'll be like, your heart is leading you astray, and it's just like where I get back to the point, and so that's a good push-pull that we have, and it's been very fruitful because we do see things from the same worldview, but the different sort of angles on that, and that's really unique and special.
Yeah, I would find that would be mutually inspiring, both of those. I think you're right that is something that really does complement each other, kind of coming out with that structure and that analytical, and the way that can inform both of what you guys are thinking and that direction. Yeah, that's a beautiful thing.
What's important for me is that it's never divorced from real life either. It's always something that's talked about in terms of what we actually care about and the things that we actually believe. And there's always a frame of reference back to our own lives and the other people in our lives and the ways that we want them to sort of interface with the movie itself. So it's not as if the movie exists in some vacuum or some bubble that is an entertainment to be disposed of. It's always something that you're supposed to use to, reckon with the elements that are in your own life. And those things shift as you get older as well, which is great. I'm grateful that I am where I am in my life, because it makes it possible for me to be able to think about things like the Quarry and the projects that we're working on now, which I doubt I would be able to do if I were 25.
Yeah, that perfectly tees up my next question. There's this quote that I love by James Baldwin. It's the purpose of art is to lay bare the questions that have been hidden by answers. And so I wanted to kind of talk with you guys both about what were the questions you guys were wrestling with as you guys were writing the script?
For me, it's always, I like any opportunity to sort of take my belief system and put it up to test, and punch on it a little bit and see how it holds. And so a lot of times I'm drawn to these stories that have to deal with religion. I come from Georgia, much like Tennessee, and in the Southeast, especially when I grew up in the 80s, 90s, and before, of course, obviously, going to church was an obligatory social thing, and you went no matter what. Church was a part of your life. And that sort of began to shift as I was in high school in the 90s, and that obligation sort of fell away. And so I was left as a young adult sort of saying, this is what I was taught to believe, and now what do I believe? And so I spent my adult life kind of reckoning or wrestling with my belief system. And so I'm drawn to stories that sort of put that out, and sort of look at it and examine it. And this story did that beautifully because it's sort of, in the most literal sense, it's putting faith or, religion, Christianity specifically, sort of on the examination block, and talking about questions like who can be forgiven, who can forgive, these big ideas that are sort of at the root of the Christian faith, examined through the lens of this really tense and powerful drama, a man on the run from his past. It's got the tension in the plot. It sort of grounds it and because if it was just about those ideas and those questions, it wouldn't mean anything. It has to have a story you care about. It has at the center of it, and it is about racism, it is about God, it is about all these things, but it's at the core of it, it's about this man. It's about, can we outrun our past? Can we escape our past? Are we defined by our past, or are we defined by our future? Are we who we were, or are we who we are going forward? These are all the questions for me anyways that I wrestle with, because a guy who's a criminal, who's done terrible things, comes in some ways because he has no structure of being a preacher. So basic setup of the stories, for those who don't know, is there's a man on the run in the middle of nowhere in Texas. He's a fugitive. We don't know what he's on the run from. He's picked up on the side of the road by this kind man who takes him to get him some food and some water. Turns out the guy is a traveling minister, a Mexican man. And as they're traveling throughout the day in this little van, the preacher is drinking the church wine, getting a little tipsy. And as they approach the town where he's going to become the new preacher, they pull off at this abandoned quarry. And now, having had some liquid truth in his veins, he confronts the man and says, "Look, I know you're on the run from something. I know you did something wrong, but you're going to get caught. You're going to get caught. That's the way it is. But your soul can be free." And he tries to save him right here on this abandoned quarry. And the man kills him. And then, in a panic, assumes his identity, goes to the church and says, "I'm the new preacher." And so you have this, a stranger in a strange town, stranger in a new place, rolls into town, doesn't know the world, turns out it's a Mexican church. And so he's this white man in this Mexican church and doesn't speak the language, doesn't know the culture. And so he has to sort of figure out how to do it. And that allowed those questions to sort of spring up organically from the story itself. Sorry, Andrew, I'm hogging the mic here. What were the questions that interested you, buddy?
Well, in keeping with what I was saying before about how I come to things from I love to think about the structure and meaning of things. I mean, they're at first certainly much more abstract. The things that are interesting to me are moral philosophies and choices, and whether we are able to be responsible for our own actions or not, and if so, whether there is any meaning to those actions. Those are the things that drive everything that I'm interested in, and the root of moral philosophy and how it finds its way into society through the church is certainly one of the most interesting themes to me. My first feature, called Nor'easter, which David Lowery edited and which eventually led me to Scott, is similar. It has a young priest, a Catholic priest, as its protagonist, and he becomes responsible for the return of a young boy who's been missing from a town for 5 years, and he becomes convinced that the boy's return is evidence of his powers as a priest, and he involves himself into the investigation of the boy's absence in ways that make him confront the worst sins that are in his community, as a metaphor for the things that were going on in the Catholic Church and the news that I was reading at the time, and the sort of destruction of the purity that I felt was at the root of the church, that I just simply couldn't avoid in thinking about. I'm not as I wasn't raised in the church the same way that Scott was, but my mother is a pipe organist by trade, and much of my family are church musicians. Half of my family is extremely devout, and so all of those things weigh heavily on my thinking. And when I was going through the script, those are certainly the things that drew me to it. Just the sense of morality that was at the core, the fact that we were dealing with big themes right up front, and that we could directly address those through the scenes in the church, were definitely the things that I found most appealing. And they echoed a lot of the things that I've been working on Nor'easter, and that I've continued to work on a lot of the other scripts that I've written since then. Everything that I've written, I think, has at one form or another directly addressed the presence of Christ, or whether his influence dictates our actions and how we have to answer for our own sins. So those were the big things that I responded to, and the idea that we would just go straight at it was a huge appeal for me.
Yeah, totally. Like, talk to, and I could say this actually about both your guys' work, but definitely Scott, and it's one thing I've always really admired about your work, is that you find these very intimate I would say smaller stories that are dealing kind of with these large universal themes that impact everything. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about, just from a technical standpoint, of how you approach it, because this is definitely a case, even with the format you guys chose to shoot on. It is a small story, but it feels so big, even with the big vistas and everything. This small town and this big thing. So kind of speaking about that, and then maybe as you're talking about that, maybe also, I'm also interested in the kind of the genres you sticking in, because you kind of did this really subtle genre bending with this movie as well.
Yeah, thanks, man. I mean, my motto on this movie and everything I do really has been, but this movie especially, what I preached to everyone was big ideas need a big canvas, and that was my. Because it is at its heart a story about people. It's a story about, in particular, these 4 or 5 central people in the story, and their lives in this very small little town in the middle of nowhere in Texas. And it's an intimate story, as you say, and that was the other sort of motto for the movie. It was big ideas need a big canvas, and it was also the marriage of the epic and the intimate. That was sort of our sort of 2 kind of code phrases as we approached it, with from everything from camera, of course, with Michael Lloyd, who shot the movie, the DP, Aaron McGill, the production designer, and Al Broder did the costumes, like the whole art department, and then Heather McIntosh did the score. The score is one of my favorite things I've ever been a part of in my work, and I think it's fantastic. And so, because I believe that you want to see. Because the ideas they're wrestling with are these big life and death sort of, and literally and metaphorically ideas. And so you want to, for me, I guess it's like feeling the person inside the world, inside the big canvas of life, and to feel like the epic nature of every individual life. Every individual life is powerful and huge and has global implications, or sure can. And so, and your life is more than just what's, the grounded part here. There's the spiritual life. There's lots of different aspects to this. And so I just want to cast, and also the land, the place is a big part of it. The stories I've told so far, at least. That Evening Sun was a farm in Tennessee. So we shot Anamorphic 35 to sort of show the small farm, small house against this big wide canvas. And the same with the Quarry. You want to see these people amongst this sort of, and to see the town in the middle of nowhere, and feel, and when you go to these different locations, the river, the train tracks, the church, there's these sort of 4 or 5 key locations in the movie, and you want them to have their own presence and to be a part of the story. And because they are the places that we live and that we work and that we come from, they are part of our story as well. And so I've always approached it from that perspective. I don't know that I always will, because I always go back and forth on both movies, both features I've made. I've always gone ultimately with the widescreen format. And this movie we shot with the Alexa 65, so it was which is basically like 65 millimeter, digitally, but it's what they shoot the Marvel movies on. And we were one of the few indie films to have used that camera, and it brings the world to life so richly and densely and hugely that it's sort of a marvel to watch. And I think it creates these spaces. It makes the church, gives it life. You see all the details in the corners and the shadows, and because we're in small spaces. We're in this tiny little house. We're in a small church. We're in a police station, a small jail cell. So we have. But the camera opens those spaces up. That camera particularly opens it up, and so you feel even when you're inside of a bedroom or a jail cell, it feels big, and like the things that are happening here are important. And those are subtle things that happen sort of subconsciously, but it's because of the frame and the lens and the camera you're using.
Yeah. like talk to me about because with the genres, it was such a because it's this like neo-Western
Mhm.
mystery like thriller, like slow burn thriller, and I felt like how did you guys approach that? Was that something like in the end of like obviously the setting you know you have it like in Texas, a Western setting, but like how conscious were you guys like in the script writing process of like the kind of those typical genres and kind of the rules of those genres and playing with that, or were you just kind of like did you just kind of was that even in your consciousness when you guys were approaching the script?
I think that's a good place where our sort of complementary,
Yeah.
approaches benefit. I'm always just about what's this character going to do next, and I'm thinking about the character and their emotional state, and Andrew typically tends to be much more cognizant of the larger implications of these moves and tracking the themes, the genre sort of tropes or standards that you sort of work within and then subvert or play into or lean into.
It's not much of a spoiler to say that a lot of that information is up front. So it's when you're watching The Quarry, one of the things that you may be aware of, or you may only be aware of it in retrospect, is that a lot of those conventions are undone by the way that the information is put up front. So that was definitely discussed. I mean, we weren't necessarily referencing a lot of Westerns, or we weren't watching a lot of Westerns to talk about how they're handled, but it was something that we were routinely talking about in terms of the fact that for this kind of a story, you know, when Scott gave you the little setup and said a man rolls into town and he's not who he says he is, generally speaking, when the man shows up, you as in the audience member don't know who he is, but in The Quarry you do, and that dramatically changed everything. It changed how the information was handled, and it changed a lot about what was demanded in terms of the pacing. And you know, you don't necessarily have to be aware of this, but it fundamentally changes the nature of the story, you know, because it completely undoes the idea that what we are after is a revelation of information, because the information is already there.
Yeah.
So that's just simply a fundamentally different story to be telling, for better or for worse, you know. And so
Yeah.
if we aren't after who is the man, then we are after a different thing. And that certainly was the goal of the script. So that aspect of it, although we weren't necessarily referencing all of the, you know, greatest Westerns or whatever, but we were certainly talking about how the revelation was fundamentally going to be a different thing. And it also informed a lot of what you might consider the typical subplots of romance or whatever, because of the drama of the revelation of who the man was never in question.
And that's what drew me to the book too. I mean, that's right from the book. That's how the book begins. And one thing I was drawn to, because like Andrew said, typically in these sort of stories, the big movie begins with the man rolls into town. And so it becomes a question of who is he, what has he done? Because you know all that already here in this movie. It's not about who is he, what has he done. It's like, what's he going to do now, in spite of what he's done or in light of what he's done. And how is everyone going to react? And when's it going to come? When's the truth going to come to light? And so we already know what the truth is. And so the tension comes from waiting to see when that truth is revealed and what's it going to happen. And that loads everything with tension and out of the gate, which is exciting to me, because that when it's loaded with tension naturally, then every scene has that tension pressing on it from the outside. You don't have to manufacture it mechanically inside of a scene and create some sort of moment or thing that's a ticking bomb in the scene. That's already happening because there's this huge information that at any moment, there's a big secret he's trying to protect. And that loads every scene with tension, and that makes them fun because you can take your time. Then that's where the slow burn comes. When you know you're headed toward, because you know at some point that secret's going to come out. That's the conventions of the genre. Same thing in That Evening Sun. You know, it's about an old man in a nursing home, gets tired of living there, walks out one day, goes back to his farm, only to discover someone's living there. So he moves into a little shack and says, I'm not leaving until I get my farm back. So now you know you're headed to this confrontation. They're going to, these two men who both are claiming the land as their own, they're going to have to come to a confrontation. So you're waiting on that. You know where you're going. With The Quarry, you know that secret's coming out, but when is it coming out? How is it going to come out? What's going to happen when it comes out? That's where the tension comes from. It allows your scenes then to take their time, to be paced patiently, because you can invest in character that way, because the tension is pressing on from the outside all the time. And that's exciting for me, because then I can take my time and explore character, which is ultimately what I love to do the most.
Yeah. So I guess like you
feel
got,
like I'm sorry. I
no,
agree
you
with
go
Scott
ahead.
there, and that the revelation of information is less interesting to me. Yeah. So I found it very engaging, you know, as a project to be involved in because of that, because it was not so much a whodunit or
Right.
whodunit, you know, it was really more about engaging with that character, that circumstance, and those moral feelings, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm getting that Will Smith's Wild Wild West was not an influence on this at all.
But you got to admit, when that spider comes through, man,
I was pushing for, Andrew was pushing for a spider, but I had
all day
to
long, spider. Where is the spider? Where is the
talk him
spider?
off the ledge.
And we shot the spider, but you had to cut it.
Yeah.
You had to cut it. It just didn't.
Budget, you know, budget.
I know, right?
Budget.
No, that was my favorite. Like, I thought that was such a bold move from a storytelling perspective to handle the story that way. And yeah, I loved it. I thought it was a bold choice. And we get kind of right when that happens up front, everything after, like, where are we going from here? Like, and then
Yeah.
everything.
That's what was exciting about reading the book. That's credit to Damon Galgut. And the book is just what I love about the way he writes that book, especially. It's the book, the text is sparse and dry and staccato and just sort of, and you feel, and so I'm always, when I'm adapting material, always trying to honor what made me love the book in the first place. Like, and so much of it is the way it's written and the style of it. And so my style as a filmmaker, I want to reflect that to create the same feeling that I read when I read the book, or that I had when I read the book. And so that sparse, tense, dry, hot, you read that book and you feel the sun burning your face, and you feel the dry skin and the leathery, you know, the parched mouth and all this stuff. And so I want to feel that when I try to accomplish what I'm feeling. And even the way we write the script, it's very, the text and the script itself is staccato and sparse, and you want to create the sense of motion that you're going to try to achieve when you make the movie. And that's a big credit to Damon, who's been a huge supporter of the project. And you know, it takes a lot of patience to wait 10 years to see your movie get made as an author. And
Right.
He's been very kind, and he likes the movie a lot, which was very rewarding.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it was great. Like, I think anytime you do that, you kind of subvert storytelling that way. Then it's like, I love that feeling as an audience member of like, wow, like anything can happen now. And I felt like you doing that up front, you had that, you just didn't know, like, you kind of broken the typical rule that you have there for a lot of those genres. And then you just kind of, and then you surrender to it. And yeah, I love the way that you guys did that. It was beautiful. Like, what were, like, as you were kind of thinking about this film from a directing standpoint, like what were the kind of films you were thinking about? Like, what were the kind of the influences or filmmakers you were thinking about as you were as you were like developing it, you were in the process, and then kind of leading up into production?
Yeah. Anytime you make a kind of Texas noir, as you might call this, in the last 10 years especially, you stand in the shadow of No Country for Old Men, and that's certainly a major influence on me as a filmmaker, as a film lover. It's probably my favorite movie in the last 20 years. And as soon as I read the book, I saw sort of that movie. And it's, you know, I used to get really, as a younger person, younger filmmaker, I would think it was not okay to have influences that are more contemporary, you know, but when a film is a masterpiece, it's just undeniably great. And you just go, that's the standard, that's the bar, you know? And so certainly visually, and from a place of pace and tone and atmosphere, that film is a huge influence on me. The other film that sort of the other side of that coin to that film, a Texas film, would be Wim Wenders' Paris, Texas, and which is a very different film in a lot of ways, but it has this sort of stranger, wandering Texas sort of energy to it. It's a character study, much more interested in character, I think, than No Country for Old Men, which is just this relentless plot. The relentless nature of evil is what No Country for Old Men is about, and just sort of like, and then Paris, Texas is just much more existential and experiential. And I love that movie. Has influenced me in a variety of ways. Aesthetically, especially Robbie Mueller's photography in that film is some of my favorite ever. And then just as I just think that's like my favorite time in Wim Wenders' career. And so those two movies I think are, and then over all of that and sort of overall everything I do, I feel the influence of, this is when it gets super nerdy, but Krzysztof Kieślowski, the Polish filmmaker who is my hero as a filmmaker. And it's funny because Kieślowski never shot a film in widescreen in his whole career, and it's always 1.8.5 or smaller. And so because he was all about the intimacy of character. But I think in this movie especially, again, and then it's that marriage of the epic and the intimate. So you have the epic sprawling canvases of No Country in Paris, Texas, and you have the intimacy of Kieślowski, and those. So as touchstones, those are my touchstones. And you can see Kieślowski probably in like the close-ups of the hands and this kind of stuff in the movie. Long, real macro lens stuff on these close-ups, because I want the intimate. So this, you go from a real wide shot to like the most extreme sort of close-up of a hand, and like, this, it's a very shallow focus. And I'm trying to connect the epic and the intimate, make that a part of the filmmaking itself. And I just have always been just staggered by the intimacy and the deep empathy that Kieślowski expresses in his movies, and especially the Three Colors trilogy and the Decalogue. And so those are deeply influential to me as well. And Andrew, the other great thing about having Andrew is a director. And so we can talk about these things, and he was on set for the movie. And so he's a great sounding board. He was in the edit with me for lots of the edit. And so he's just a great sounding board and really a partner and much more than just a co-writer on this project. And that's a huge gift to have someone you trust and who's a second set of eyes for you is very important.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I appreciated what Scott said, and I certainly felt the same way. It's like what we were saying before. Scott and I are, very closely related. Very, we share a lot of our goals, and at the same time, I just, Scott is his own director, and I love watching him do his work, and he constantly is making choices that are great and that surprise me, and that the marriage of the script to his sensibility, and also to Lloyd's exceptional work with the, pretty phenomenal camera resources that we were given, just constantly surprised and delighted me. I mean, I was so pleased with what was done during production, and just this week I was able to get my hands on the Blu-ray, and I was just so pleased with the image all the way throughout. So
yeah,
a lot of that goes to Scott and his collaboration with Mike.
Well, I've got two more questions for you. I don't want to take up your guys' whole afternoon, but I'd be amiss not to mention this just because Michael Shannon and Shea Wiggum are two of my favorite actors, and I've had the opportunity to work with Mike, and I found him to be one of the most generous actors I've ever worked with. So I just wanted to talk with you about what was that experience like, working with two guys like that are both such heavyweights, like in their own regards, and that process and that collaboration.
It's powerful and wonderful and it's incredibly, I just felt very honored that they both wanted to do the movie. I'd actually approached Mike 10 years ago through you. So you connected me to Mike when I first wrote the script. and I wanted him to play this role, and he was not available at the time for like a year. He was making Superman, and so we had to go another direction. And so it was just a beautiful gift when Shay came on, you know, through Kristen and Laura's relationship with Shay, and then Kristen is very close to Mike as well. And so, and obviously Shay and Mike are very close. This is their 7th project or something, I think. So when Kristen brought Mike back onto the project, and then she didn't even realize at the time that he had known about it before. And it just was a beautiful sort of full circle thing. And I know Mike was really excited about sort of like supporting Shay. This is Shay's first real lead, you know, in a film. And I think he's just so deserving of that. He's put in such wonderful performances over the years. And so I was excited to be able to give him that. And he fulfilled every expectation. You know, when you're number one on the call sheet, when you're the lead actor in a movie, you have a responsibility. You set the tone for everyone else beneath you and are working with you. And Shay filled that role exceptionally. He was the most generous. He was always the guy who was like, do my sides last. He always stayed late. He waived his turnaround times and fees and all that. He was just he wanted to make the movie. We had limited resources, limited time. It's an indie film, you know, it's like, it's always, you're always, any film you're compromised. Even the biggest budgeted movies, you're compromised on time. But, you know, we had our limitations. And I love limitations. I love creativity through limitations. But that requires people who are really committed to the movie. And Mike and Shay certainly went across the board. Catalina, Bobby Soto, Bruno, Anthony Reynolds, everybody was committed to the movie. And I really love that, because it's what's necessary. Nobody was difficult. Mike and Shay do all the work. They do the work. And what's fun is they're very different actors. You know, you would think they might be very similar because they have a similar energy on screen and intensity on screen, but the way they work is very different. And that was fun. It took me a minute. You know, you have to figure out, as a director, part of your job is to assimilate. You know, you got to like everyone has a different process, and so you got to figure out how to communicate with each actor, and which has not always been my forte. But those guys are really so prepared that that often you can just sort of let them go. They make great choices. What I love about Mike is his instincts are so fantastic. Mike does all the prep before he comes ready to. He knows exactly how he's going to do the scene, and you know, he works the scene in a pretty. You know, he does. I mean, one day we were sitting in the edit, and I went through all the dailies and the takes, and there were I counted literally 2 takes that I wouldn't use in the movie. Every take I could use in the movie, and he's that good. And everything is, you know, variations on a theme. He's got his way. He's doing it, and he's doing it, but his instincts are so spot on that every line reading was just like I had heard it in my mind. That's never happened to me before with an actor. And Shay, also equally as prepared, but Shay will take wild swings. He'll take big swings. He'll try things in a scene. So he'll try crazy stuff in a scene. Like he'll just do something totally interesting and weird and fun and different, just to see how it feels, just to see how people react. And it comes from a place of great preparation, but he's not afraid to take swings. And sometimes that means his batting average is lower than Mike's, but like, you know, sometimes those swings are just not the right thing. But I love that he tries things, and I love that he gives me different, because sometimes I'll do something and it's just like, that's exactly what needs to happen in this moment. And I never would have thought of that. Like, whether it's like, he would just, he uses his body as an instrument in this movie, especially because he's carrying this burden of guilt. And you can literally see it like contorting his body in some scenes, like when he's in the church and Mike's interrogating him as the police chief, and Shay's body is like contorting, and it's just, you feel the grief and the burden weighing on him in a physical way. And that's so interesting to me. And not in the script, and things he's doing to bring the character to life in his own way. And so they're very different, but they synthesize. And because they respect each other so much, they have a deep, deep love for each other, that they're just coming, when they're together in a scene, it's just electric, because they are just, they're pros. They bring their A game every scene, no matter who's in the scene with them, as you know. But like when they're together, it's something special.
Yeah, there's probably such a trust there too at this point with
Yeah.
those guys. So just like
Totally.
it's a gift as a director, just knowing that your two actors have that much faith in each other, and just to go
Totally.
there and that vulnerability, which is really evident there. And still, but just the way you corralled that too is such a skill, because you are like, those are two very different styles, and being able to recognize that and do it like. I remember with Mike, when we were doing Shotgun Stories, like Jeff Nichols asked Mike about, I was thinking we're going to rehearse these couple of scenes. And Mike looked at him and goes, Jeff, I'm more of a keep the juice in the lemon kind of actor. That was so great.
Keep the juice in the that's right, man.
Yeah.
When you know that the juice is perfectly sweet, you just let them, you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah. So, well, I just got one more question, because I really want to get to this. I'd be remiss if I didn't. Like you had mentioned her before, but like Heather McIntosh's score on this is not only like, I mean, I think it's some of her best work that she's done. It was so next level. And I just wanted to, and that was like, I'd gotten the opportunity to see, as you were editing this a couple of times, but I never had the benefit of doing it. And so that was such a revelation, because it did so much for the film. It was such a part of it. It was such a character in the film. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about that collaboration, because it was there. And then also Ryan Bingham, that was like another surprise too, of doing a track for the film as well.
Ryan, it's a great song. Ryan and Shay are buddies, and he did it as a favor to Shay, and he really liked the script, and wrote this song that I just thought was powerful. It reminded me a lot. I've been very fortunate. Patterson Hood of the Drive-By Truckers wrote a couple of songs from my first film, and the one he wrote that for the end credits is a song called Depression Era, very similar in its sort of tone and style and approach to Ryan's song, somber sort of ballad of a man. And I've been very fortunate in that respect, to have these two great songwriters write these songs. And Heather is just a kind of a marvel. This is our second project. She scored my documentary, Holbrook Twain, and I'd met her when she scored Craig Zobel's film Compliance. Heather and I are both from Georgia, as well as Craig is, and so we have that Georgia connection. And that was probably 2012, 2013. I met her, and we just started talking, and she worked on my doc, and that was a much smaller job. It was just like 3 or 4 pieces, music.
Yeah.
And I had sent her the Quarry back when we were trying to make it the first time. So 7 or 8 years ago when I met her. And so she's been thinking about this movie for a long time. But even still, like we had to evolve. And what I love about having a relationship, like any working relationship, is that when you build trust, you can push each other. And so Heather, you can push people to continue to dig deeper, and she did, and she's willing to do the work. And and so she presents ideas to me, and we go through and listen to them, and we had sort of built this whole opening. This is sort of her commitment. We had built this sort of whole opening suite to the movie, and I liked it a lot. It just wasn't quite working for me. And then she wrote this cue that was supposed to be for later in the movie, and I heard it, and I'm like, that's the theme of the movie, and that's what opens the movie now. It's just really a wonderful theme, of which then the rest of the movie builds around. I think like you said, the score should be a part of the storytelling. It should be its own character in a way, and it should help you tell the story. And so, and how I like to do that is I like a strong theme. I like a theme that recurs, I like motifs. I like things you recognize, whether it's for characters or locations or just the mood and the tone. And it begins as, and Heather's a cellist, so all of her stuff is cello based. But what happens in the movie is, and as she wrote it, it just evolves from this sort of cello based thing to this sort of, evolves in the second half of the movie to this ethereal, deep, sort of Lynchian, strange, wonderful stew of just tone and mood. And I was just so struck by, and a lot of that second half of the movie came out in this sort of flurry in about a week of work, really, like as we were getting near the end. And we had finally sort of honed the first half of the movie. And then this second half, it just like excavates the soul of the movie. And it just like digs in, and it's like lush and rich. And I just was sort of bowled over by it, really. And it's I'm so honored to have that part. And that's what when you make movies, you're just collaborating. And so you want to have, and I mean, you look at the production design in this movie, it's unbelievable. And based on the kind of resources Aaron McGill had, Anel made these iconic costumes, and just things you remember, things that stick in your head, images that stick in your head. And
yes, please. Yeah.
What's that?
No, never mind.
Oh, sorry.
1 second. No.
But it's, so I was just very fortunate to have these wonderful, talented people who gave their such great talents. Syra Hyder and Alex O'Flynn, who edited the movie. And, it's just across the board, I had, it was really wonderful. And of course, Laura and Kristen, who were sort of at the head of everything, holding the movie together, with their bare hands sometimes, and making it all happen. And so it's just been, I'm very grateful, because a movie like this, it's trying to talk about real things. It's trying to have something to say about the world. Those aren't the easiest movies to get made, and I'm grateful to Lionsgate as well. I mean, Lionsgate came on and distributed the film, and to have distribution, and we were supposed to premiere it at South by Southwest this year, and that got canceled, of course. And I'm so fortunate, so grateful that we had this distribution in place, so that the film could get out, because I know a lot of films that are just floundering because they lost all their festival opportunities, and that's tragic, so I'm very grateful to Lionsgate, and the DVD Blu-ray just came out this last week. So I'm excited for more folks to get to see it now, and so it's been rewarding. So I'm grateful.
That's awesome. That's a great note to end on. I did want to second that too, that Quarry is now available on digital, on-demand, Blu-ray, and DVD. So for all those out there watching, it's a great movie, and it's one that is really rewarding to watch, and you guys did a great job. And thanks both you guys for making the time to do this Q&A. It's been awesome talking to you guys.
Thanks,
Look forward
Much appreciated.
seeing you guys when I'm back out in LA.
All right, buddy. Love you, man. Thanks, brother.
Guys, yeah, likewise. You guys be good.
We're excited about this virtual Q&A, and we're looking forward to be doing these in-person Q&As here at the Tivoli once everything after COVID opens up, and the screening series, we're in this beautiful theater and getting to experience this all together again in person.